All right, all right. Good evening, everybody. You're truly Dr. Pierre, your favorite board certified internist, host of another episode of Real Physician Reacts. If this is your first time catching this, I want to apologize, right? I am not at my typical, comfy home. I'm actually, as you can see, I'm actually working this evening. But I didn't get a chance to talk to you guys last week because we were going to talk about the whole Djokovic tennis fiasco. We'll probably still talk about that. But I wanted to make sure I said, I'm not going to miss 2 weeks in a row for you guys. So I said, figure out, I'm going to do this like right from, the quote unquote comfort of the overnight doctor's lounge, right? So I'm working nights at one of my places that I work at, select specialty hospitals and long-term care facility. But I had some little bit of downtime, at least for now, right? This may be the one episode. If you just kind of see me, if you see me get a phone call and kind of pick up and running, then something probably went down. But don't worry, I'd probably shut down everything before I click and go anyway. But again, if this is your first time catching this, what we typically do on a week-to-week basis is we talk about either a video or a social media post or something that kind of just hits across the timeline that we have to talk about it, and more importantly, give what the personal view of majority, I don't want to say all physicians, right? Can't say all, but what majority of physicians are likely thinking based on the news. So this week we are talking about Mr. Joe Rogan, a deep side with him for lots of different reasons, right? He's definitely one that I don't want to have to talk about until we're forced to talk about, really, because he has such a ridiculous following. And doing this series, this Real Physician React series, I didn't realize how many anti-vaxxers had like huge followings until I started doing it. And then I go to my comment section, and then I realize like I'm like I'm in the bullseye for their particular fan base. One person who comes to mind is this chiropractor, Kevin Stillwagon. I did his episode, I think like a month and a half ago. Forget when I did his episode. I'll put a link in the description, when it's said and done. But I did his episode, and still people pester me when I go to my website. His name is one of the most looked up keywords on my website. It's absolutely crazy, but it is what it is, right? So we're going to be talking about Joe Rogan, who is a podcast host, and Mr. Dr. Robert Malone. You may have remember, we've talked about Dr. Robert Malone here in the past. He claims to be the father of mRNA technology, the inventor of the mRNA vaccines, and of course wants all the credit. But he's a big anti-vaxxer, and typically, especially in this series, we talk a lot about anti-vaxxers, and he's definitely one of them. But we're going to talk about a recent episode that Joe Rogan did with Dr. Robert Malone, who, again, they're both anti-vaxxers. Go figure, right? And it was what you would particularly expect when you have a room full of anti-vaxxers, and they have such an audience to talk to and just like yell out, BS after BS, right? So let's highlight. This article was first started in kind of the Rolling Stone, where they let me go to it real quick. All right, let me get that out of there. Cancel. So, a menace to public health. Doctors demand Spotify puts an end to COVID lies on Joe Rogan Experience. So, first and foremost, let me come back real quick before we, dive into the article. First and foremost, there's about 270 physicians, scientists, and other doctors who wrote a letter to Spotify. Again, Joe Rogan's podcast is primarily produced and distributed through Spotify. So of course that they went to the source, the company's source, to say like, hey, you need to do something about this podcast host that is telling blatant lies all across your platform, right? You need to do something about that. And of course, right, interesting enough, Spotify doesn't, what I've read, Spotify doesn't really have a misinformation policy. So people are just able to go on there and just say all kinds of crazy stuff. And they don't have a policy to say like, hey, if you say that crazy stuff, it's on you, not on us. which is why they went to Spotify directly to say, hey, like and first of all, if you don't know Joe Rogan, he has a crazy following on the podcast front, right? Like millions and millions of people listen to his podcast on a weekly basis. So imagine like you have a podcast where just misinformation is just spewed out of two of the biggest anti-vaxxers that we know. And then here you go, if you're impressionable and you maybe you don't know and you don't understand what's going on, like you say like, oh, you know what, maybe what they're saying is actually true, right? Like that's unfortunately what happened, right? So let's kind of go to the article. Let's delve to the article real quick. So they called him a menace to public health, which I absolutely love. Shout out to my public health folks. Spotify again does not have a clear policy prohibiting misinformation. 270 physicians and scientists are hoping to change that. Right. So this all kind of started with Jessica Malati Rivera. I apologize if I'm saying her name wrong, who is an infectious disease epidemiologist. Remember, we actually had on my podcast, we had an infectious disease epidemiologist, Velton Scholl, come on there as well, too. You know, those folks are pretty smart in that regards. So I guess she came, or her followers sent her links to Joe Rogan's episode to kind of say like, hey, can you talk about this? Because apparently she likes to debunk a lot of these things that are on here, right? So one of the things that Dr. Robert Malone, again, who fake claims, oh, hold on for a second. Oh, sorry about that, y'all. Dr. Robert Malone comes on there and talks about what he calls mass formation psychosis. You may be wondering what the H is that, right? We were wondering the same thing. So what Doctor, and I'll just highlight a couple points and really kind of get home, really what I want to do this week's episode. So Dr. Rob Malone goes on there and saying that like the reason why the public is so enamored with COVID-19 vaccine and want to get treated is because us health professionals and the government have done such a great job essentially hypnotizing them to the fact that they should get it and totally denying and refuting any ill effects associated with any of the vaccines, right? This is what Dr. Robert Malone believes. He also spent some time talking about Dr. Fauci. We know very well, we especially here on this show, we are a fan of Dr. Robert Fauci because not only does he love science, he loves truth. And he's clearly Dr. Robert Malone is against that. So he does not like Dr. Robert Fauci. So he made up lies about Dr. Fauci. He talked about how the government and worlds across the, other governments across the world are essentially hiding all of the ill effects associated with the vaccines. He talked about how hospitals are incentivized, right? Incentivized to say like a person died from COVID because apparently they get paid extra money for it. And again, I'm paraphrasing it, but like that's kind of the gist of what him and Joe Rogan were kind of going back and forth agreeing with and saying. And this is why, and I talked about this on this series before, why misinformation is so dangerous. And right now, I'm not even going to give them the credit to say they're doing misinformation. Remember, we talked, if you don't know, we said that misinformation is when like you give out, some medical opinion, some health related opinion, some science related opinion, and you didn't know that what you're saying was not true. Disinformation, which is even worse, is when deep in your heart, you have to know that deep in your heart, what you're saying is incorrect and you're spreading it anyways. Like at this point, Dr. Robert Malone, Joe Rogan are in the practice of disinformation. And that's why I was so glad to see, these doctors, these scientists, couple health professionals as well, to say like, no, enough is enough. I got to do something. And again, we're never going to get the Joe Rogans of the world to shut up. That's not going to happen. But we have to be able to go to these companies and say, hey, do you stand by this? Like, is this something you're for? Like, imagine for the company I work for. If the company I work for, if I was on this live, right? If I was going live, if I was, posting blog posts, if I was doing podcasts and just saying the most outrageous and craziest things, a person may not be able to, directly tell me, hey, stop doing it, but they may be able to tell my boss, like, hey, do you know what the hell Dr. Pierre is saying on his podcast? Do you know what the hell Dr. Pierre says on The Real Physician Reacts? Do you know what he's saying? Like, are you okay with that? And that's who we have to try to be able to hold some of these people accountable. Again, for disclosure, Dr. Robert Malone's already been kicked off of Twitter because of his false COVID-19 related claims, right? He's already been kicked off. Remember, Twitter lets anybody get on there, but they kicked them off because they said, hey, you are purposely spreading disinformation and you're not going to do it on here because we have a policy that doesn't allow you to do it. So the goal, which I'm hoping, especially for, these 270 different people who say, you know what, we're fed up. And trust me, those are just 207 people who happen to write it. Trust me, there are hundreds of thousands of more people who would have gladly signed whatever letter petition needed to be signed to say, hey, Spotify, listen up. And what I've already seen, because that happened like about a week or so ago, what I've already seen is the propaganda machine trying to discredit what those 270 professionals did, because initially a lot of the blog posts and the headlines were always 270 doctors wrote a letter to Spotify and say, hey, tell Joe Rogan, stop it. And then what occurred is some of these propagandas are like, oh, looks like it wasn't only 270 doctors. Maybe there were only, I think the number was about 87 medical doctors and then 100 PhDs, trying to, again, discredit what's going down, with the onus, right? The onus is, hey, you have a person on there who is spreading and purposely spreading misinformation, and their guest is a person who's been known to spread disinformation and who in fact has been kicked off other social media platforms for spreading it, right? Like what are you gonna do about it? Oh, hold on for a second. All right, yeah, sorry about it. Like I said, I told you guys this week was this week's episode is gonna be going because, like I said, I'm literally at work, right? Literally at work, which is funny because on a side note, we'll talk about Joe Rogan in a second. I remember one of the people's comments of one of these episodes I did was like, I don't even know if you work. You're just a plant. They call me a plant. I don't know why would they call me a plant, but they call me a plant. So again, it's definitely good to be able to see like, hey, you know what? Yes, I am working. Yes, I do this, right? I take care of patients actively, especially, and that's why we're so passionate. That's why that's why I'm so passionate about, just all of the topics. Going obviously with COVID-19 being, such a significant, disease process across the world, it's going to get a lot of the major fanfare, but like, we talk about all kinds of crazy things just to do it. Like there's so many different medical topics, an array of medical topics that we touch on, but it's just one of those things where COVID-19 unfortunately gets a lot of the fanfare. So that being said, go back into Joe Rogan. This is what you have to do, right? You have to make a stand against people like the Joe Rogans and the Dr. Robert Malones, because if we keep giving them platforms to spread this information, remember I told you, like, his podcast is listened to by millions every single week, right? So those are millions of people who are listening and hearing like just blatant lies, and they're going to believe it. And what's going to happen is not only they're going to believe it, they're going to take it for truth. And then when they take it for truth, guess what they're going to do? They're going to say, oh, you know what? I heard on the Joe Rogan podcast that, Dr. Pierre and his cronies get paid extra money when a person dies from COVID, right? Like, I heard that there's I may be under some like psychosis, right, to get people to take the vaccine, right? They are going to there's plenty of people who are actually going to believe what they're saying. So that's why you need that type of energy, right? Like, I think what's happened, especially when it comes to misinformation in the healthcare field, is that as physicians, we were very passive in our approach. We were like, you know what they're saying, we know it's not true, and we believe that the general public will understand that that's not true either. And what we've learned is that we can't be passive in our approach to fighting misinformation. Like, we have to go after it. And that's what you do when you write a letter to the boss, right? To Spotify. You say, hey, you know what? This guy right here, he's got to stop it. And again, even though they said only 270 people wrote it, trust me, there are thousands and thousands of people who would have gladly signed on to that to say, yeah, like, stop it, right? I'm not telling you to get rid of the Joe Rogan podcast. Nah. First of all, there's a lot of money that this guy makes Spotify. That ain't going to happen. But I will tell you that if you're going to allow him to say that, there better be disclaimers up and down, that podcast episode, up and down your website. Like, hey, our views are not that guy's views. Like, that's not us, right? Like, you need to come out and publicly say it, especially because we know people are dying. We know people are dying out here. Today is January 20th. It's January 20th. Today marks the 2-year anniversary since the first time we diagnosed someone with COVID-19 here in this country. So if we are not proactive in fighting the misinformation, if we're not sending out our letters, if we're not yelling from the rooftops, screaming at a computer while in my call room, if we're not doing these types of things, we will always fall behind. Like, it just is what it is, right? And like I said, this Joe Rogan guy is a person I did not want to have to talk about, because I know eventually once his, fan base, does their YouTube searches or wherever they do and they find it, they're going to comment and they're going to say I'm a liar. They're going to say I'm bought out by by Big Pharma. They're going to say all those things there, right? But like, we can't allow that to dissuade our need to fight like that misinformation, right? And that's just is what it is. It just is what it is. We can't allow that to happen, right? And again, like I said, I'm glad that these 270 stepped out there and said, like, hey, enough is enough. I'm pretty sure they're getting all kinds of backlash, especially what was her name? Let me apologize. Jessica Rivera Malati. I apologize. I apologize for saying your name wrong. Maybe I try to get her on the show. Maybe I'll try to get her on the podcast or something. But yeah, like, it's just a different level of craziness out there, right? If we can take one thing from this week's episode, is that we should not be listening to Joe Rogan and Dr. Robert Malone tell us anything about COVID-19, tell us anything about COVID-19 vaccines. They are clearly so jaded that, like, factual information is not going to cut it with those folks. And especially those on the other side, like, being truthful, presenting facts, that's not going to cut it with those guys right here. Because we know it's not going to cut with those guys, like, we just have to leave those guys alone. But unfortunately, those guys they have a big voice, right? They when they talk, a lot of people listen. And that's why we have to, like, stand out and say, you know what? Enough is enough. We are going to like Spotify, do something. Like, somebody do something, because we're fed up, man. So again, like I said, I'm yours truly, Dr. Barry. Again, apologize for a couple interruptions. It's so funny is that because I've been here for a few hours, 0 calls in the few hours I was here, 0 calls, and then the second we go live, like, multiple calls throughout, right? It just that's how it works. So y'all guys be blessed. right? Like you said, again, thank you for checking into another episode of Real Physician Reacts, where we critique what we see on social media. And again, I'm just letting you know now, as a physician, you know, seeing and hearing what the Joe Rogans of the world and the Dr. Robert Malones of the world are still able to do is disheartening. But I'm glad there's plenty, and I think a lot of people think like I'm one of like the small minority people who like want to fight misinformation. There's so many people, so many different platforms. Again, I'm on everywhere. I'm on YouTube, obviously. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, and every platform I'm on, there's people fighting the misinformation out there, because unfortunately there's plenty out there, right? So you guys be blessed. Have a great evening, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.